Hello dear aspirants. In this video we will study about French Revolution from UPSC's perspective if you're preparing for UPSC, especially for the mains answer writing thing. Now here we will focus on the events and the ideas. UPSC is particularly interested in the ideas of French Revolution, ideas of American Revolution, the ideas which came out of these revolutions and influenced the modern world. Okay, in 2018 UPSC asked a similar question, but ideas cannot be studied in isolation. You cannot just study the ideas, you also need to know about the events, the history, okay, the things which happened, because these are the circumstances which led to these ideas. Something happened during the French Revolution that people came out with these ideas. Okay, so therefore studying the event is also important in order to understand the ideas. So we'll study the event and see at what point these people thought that there should be liberty, that there should be equality or constitutionalism or popular sovereignty. What were the exact moments when people thought that these are valuable, and the entire world, the entire modern world copied these things or got influenced or took these things from the French Revolution into their own constitution. So let's start with the events that occurred in the French Revolution. Now if you look at the timeline, you will see that French Revolution started in 1789. Okay, and American Revolution ended in 1783. American Revolution started in 1765. So American Revolution continued for 18 years, whereas French Revolution, it started in 1789 and finally in 1871 we get the Republic of France, the modern France which we see today. So there is a span of 82 years. American Revolution was done and dusted by 18 years, within 18 years, whereas French Revolution went on and on till 82 years, and finally in 1871 we get the modern France. The first difference here is the time. French Revolution was in the middle of Europe, a much more complicated place than that isolated USA, and many powers were influencing French Revolution. France was trying to influence the other European power. They went on war, people came and went. There was a Napoleon's era, there was a brief moment of monarchy introduced. So it was a very complicated thing, hence it went on for 82 years. French Revolution was basically overthrowing the king and the tyranny of the king. So the overthrowing of this elite class and creating a nation where everybody is equal and everybody has freedom, everybody has equal rights. This is what is all about French Revolution, overthrowing those elite people and creating a nation of equality, liberty, fraternity. Okay, this is what French Revolution is in a nutshell. Now if you look at the society of 18th century France, let me tell you the condition of the society in France. See, France that time was divided into 3 estates. In 1789 France was divided into 3 estates. There was a king and there were 3 estates. The first estate belonged to the clergy people, the priests, the fathers of the churches. Now this category people, they were religious people, very much influential in the royal court, very rich, had lot of property, lot of land, but paid zero tax, no tax at all, and did no productive work. There was completely ruling class. And the second estate of the 3 estates, the second estate belonged to the nobles. In Hindi what you call as like Nawab or Rais Zade kind of people. They captured the entire government services, all the positions in the government services, public services, army positions. It was all occupied by the second estate people, the nobility, the royal people. These 2 estates, the first estate of the clergy and the priest and second estates of the nobles, these 2 estates consisted of only 2% of France population. The remaining 98% of France population consisted of the third estate, the common people. They included the farmers, the laborers, okay, the artisans, the craftsmen, the middle class people as well, the doctors, the accountants, the traders, merchants, businessmen, everybody consisted of the third estate, the common people. Now the third estate was economically very important because French economy was standing on the shoulders of the third estate. From the farmers to the trader, businessmen, everybody did economic work, but they had no political prestige and no rights. They paid all the taxes. The first two estate paid zero tax, no tax at all. Entire tax of the country, the entire revenue of the state was paid by the third estate. The taxes were so high that they had to pay 2/3 of their annual income. Like if you are earning 100 rupees, you had to pay 67 rupees as tax to the state, and you have to survive within the 33 rupees which you have. So this was the condition of the third estate. The third estate was very much angry with the French state, with the king, with these two estates, and they were on a brink of a civil war. Now in 1789, the ruler of France was Louis XVI. People hated him. People hated him because he was an utterly incompetent and out of joint ruler. He had a wife, Marie Antoinette. She was more or less a tail which wagged the entire dog. She was influencing the emperor big time, and it was indirectly her rule. The emperor was also heavily influenced by the top two estates and was completely insensitive to the grievances of the third estate. Now in 1789, France was facing one of the biggest economical crises they ever had. 1789 was the tipping point. Due to the absolute monarchy system in France, France was facing economic backwardness compared to Britain, which was its arch rival. Since 120 years, Britain was already having a parliamentary system. People, the welfare of people and proper governance was given prominence. Hence, the economic model that was followed in Britain, capitalist model, Adam Smith's model of economy, was followed in Britain for last 120 years. Therefore, Britain was much more advanced economically. It was able to control its colonies. It was able to extract wealth from colonies in a big way, in a proper way, whereas France was unable to do that. France still had that feudal economic model and absolute monarchy as a system of governance. Hence, France was facing economic backwardness compared to Britain and was getting poorer and poorer day by day. France was also engaged in too many wars with Britain. You must have remembered in the American Revolution video that first France fought a 7-year war, which was actually a 9-year war. It fought with Britain in North America, in Africa and in India, and everywhere it lost. Then the French lost many of its colonies or potential colonies to Britain. If France was efficient, you must remember that France should have ruled India. It was in a good position and it came to India before Britain. Had France and a proper economic model, we would have been speaking French now. Okay, but because France lost and completely got routed out in the Battle of Vandivash, it was East India Company, the British East India Company, which ruled India, and we are speaking in English. So it fought many wars with Britain and it lost many wars with Britain, and therefore it lost many of its cash cows. Then the American Revolution, France supported the American revolutionaries against Britain because it had to take some kind of revenge. It could not fight a war directly against Britain now, but it was supporting indirectly the revolutionaries to fight against Britain. Now it is kind of irony that France is supporting revolutionaries who are fighting for their own independence, for self-governance, whereas France itself is following a monarchical government. So this is kind of an irony which was observed by the French revolutionaries. So American support to American Revolution, fighting so many wars, got their coffers empty. France was completely bankrupt in 1789. Now, because it was facing so much financial crisis, the emperor decided to call a general meeting of the three estates. Now, this general meeting is not called every day or annual basis. It's rarely a general meeting is called. This 1789's general meeting was actually called after 176 years. That bad the situation was. Okay, the general meeting was called three estates, the representative of the three estates came to the king's court and they conducted a meeting. The king tried to find a solution and he came with a genius idea of taxation, more taxation. The first and the second, the first two estate agreed with the king's decision because they don't have to pay anything. They were not paying earlier, they still don't have to pay any tax. The entire burden of this increased tax was going to fall again on the third estate. Remember, the third estate was already paying 2/3 of their income. A more addition to that tax will make life impossible for them. Hence they protested, but the king got this motion into voting. The voting was through and the bill was passed because two estates supported it and only one estate opposed it. With 2/3 majority, this taxation provision was passed, and from that time onwards the third estate was subject to even more taxation, which kind of got the third estate mad and they revolted and they conducted their separate meeting in the royal tennis court. The palace had an indoor tennis court. In that tennis court they conducted their own meeting. That third estate's own meeting was named as the National Assembly. Now the third estate people, they created the National Assembly, and in that National Assembly, in their discussion, they thought that it is very important to create a written constitution for France. This is where the idea of constitutionalism emerged in French Revolution. The first constitution in France was written by the National Assembly. So if you talk about the ideas of French Revolution, there is an important idea of constitutionalism. This is where constitutionalism emerged. They created this constitution. It was named as Right of Man and Citizen. This was the name of the document which the National Assembly created. Now the National Assembly was the first parliament of France which drafted the constitution and was drafting laws which will run the French nation. We often hear these terms, right wing, left wing, moderate, centrist, extreme right, extreme left. What do you mean by this right wing and left wing? A person today, if he supports a political party, suppose BJP, he is called right wing. And somebody who supports the socialist parties or the communist parties, they are called left wing. Now what do you mean by that? They don't have a right hand longer or left hand longer. The term originates from French Revolution in the National Assembly. National Assembly was like a parliament, as I told, and people used to sit in a semicircular seating arrangement. People who had moderate views or centrist views used to sit in the center. They were called the centrist. People who had conservative views, they used to sit in the right hand sides of the seats. People with liberal views used to sit in the left hand side seats of the National Assembly. They were called the leftists. And people who had more rightist views, who were reactionaries, characters like Robespierre or Jacobins, which you will study later on, they were the extreme right reactionary groups. They used to sit in the extreme right. That is known as extreme right. Today if somebody is very much right wing, a militant kind of right wing which leads to kind of religious terrorism and all sorts of riots and all those things, they are called extreme right. Similarly, the left also had a militant group which was known as radical. They used to sit in extreme left. So from French Revolution, from National Assembly, these terms also originate: right wing, left wing, extreme right, extreme left, moderate, centrist. So these terms, when you hear in news or you hear in any kind of discussion, remember this, that they are the product of French Revolution, especially National Assembly in particular. So National Assembly created constitution. National Assembly abolished monarchy. National Assembly also changed the economic model, which was a feudal system. They brought in capitalism, laissez-faire of Adam Smith, free hand, where government will not interfere with the business. They tried to bring a newer economic model in France. So they reformed the economy. The National Assembly also removed religion or church's interference in the government affairs. Now these were the people of third estates. They were, for hundreds of years, they have been tormented by the first estate, which was the religious group, the clergy people, and they were tormented and abused by the second estate as well, which were the nobles who got all the government positions, all the offices, and they were the royalty. So National Assembly got rid of the religious people, and that is where the idea of secularism was born, to get rid of religious people from government issues. And that is where our secularism and French secularism differs so much. Our secularism is respecting all the religion, not interfering in anybody's religious affairs, and not taking sides with particular religion. But French secularism means completely removing any hint of religion and religious people from the governance, because they were tormented for hundreds of years by the clergy class. So they got rid of them. That is the secular value. That is the type of secular value they have. So again, what did National Assembly do? They created constitution. They removed monarchy, they removed the king, the monarchical system of governance. They reformed the economy from feudal economy to capitalist economy, and they made France secular, got rid of the clergy class. These were the main achievements of National Assembly, and that terminologies which I told you. So now let's see what are the limitations of this National Assembly. Where did they fail, or what were the things they couldn't do well enough? Now if we look at the constitution in particular, which they created, rights of man and citizen, they also had many modern ideas. Let's see one by one what are these ideas which they created in the constitution, right of man and citizen. Now these are some important ideas which emerged of the first constitution of France, the National Assembly's constitution, right of man and citizen. First is the freedom. They defined freedom. Freedom is to do whatever you want until and unless you interfere with the national interest or you don't harm anybody. You're free to do anything. You're free to work anywhere in whatever craft you want. You can work, and you're basically free to do anything, say anything, or freedom of press, freedom to criticize. So various kinds of freedoms were given. Then the concept of equality. The third estate, the people who created National Assembly, they always faced inequality. So because they got so much unequal treatment for centuries, they laid importance in equality, that everybody, law should be same for everybody, and the government's treatment should be same for everyone. So the third idea that came out of the French constitution was innocent until proven guilty. This thing was not followed in the monarchical times. There were a lot of prejudice against the third estate people. Then equal eligibility for government services. Earlier only the second estate people were eligible, were supposed to be eligible for the government positions, the army positions, the bureaucracy, everywhere. Now every person is equally eligible for any government office. The next idea that came out of the first constitution was accountability for civil servants. Now each and every civil servant will have to be accountable for his or her deeds. Then the idea of fraternity, brotherhood. They were a brotherhood. The National Assembly was a brotherhood of the third estate. Brotherhood was important for nation building, for nation creation. They defined nation. Nation was not a territory. Nation is people living in that territory, and the aim of the nation should be the well-being of those people. And for that, the people have to treat each other like brothers. Okay, then from that brotherhood, a nation is formed, and there is nationalism. Then source of power. In the earlier days, in the monarchical times, people believed that the source of power, the king is the source of power, and the king is backed by God. Therefore, king is the source of power. But now in the modern state, in the new constitution, people are the source of power, and the power of making laws resides in the people. So any law which is made in the constitution is made by the people, and people are the original source of power in a modern state. So these were the modern ideas which came out of the first constitution of the National Assembly. Now, despite having such modern ideas in the National Assembly's constitution, the National Assembly also faced many limitations. These are the few limitations. First is they failed to give universal adult suffrage, that is voting right for everybody. The voting right was only given to certain individuals who had their income above a certain threshold. If you are earning less than that threshold, then you won't get voting rights. So universal adult suffrage was not given in the first constitution of France, which is a major limitation and against the spirit of French Revolution, which spoke of equality. Then the control of bourgeois means middle class people, okay, the merchants, the traders, or the doctors, lawyers, these people in the society, the middle class people, are known as bourgeois. So earlier the governance, the administration was in the hands of aristocrats, nobles, but now bourgeois were in control, and therefore the peasants got the benefit of the revolution, because the lands captured by the clergy or the nobles was taken and distributed among the farmers and the landless peasants. But the workers, the labor class, the other poor people, the artisans did not get what they were promised, or did not or were not treated according to the spirits of French Revolution. And it was only favoring bourgeois, the middle class people who had higher income and hence got voting rights, and the laws were made which favored this class of people. Now the National Assembly consisted of a group called Jacobins. They were extremist people. They were far right and have only extreme measures. They only had extreme solutions for every problem, like execution, murdering people, okay, state sponsored murder. Every problem had just one solution, that is execution via guillotine. Guillotine is a machine in which you chop off people's head. So Jacobins were earlier a fringe group. They used to sit in the corner in the extreme right side of the National Assembly, but eventually they became the dominant power of National Assembly, and the entire National Assembly consisted of only Jacobins. Once they came to the power, when Jacobins came to the power, there was no room for criticism. There was no room for any kind of logical discourse. Whatever the Jacobins said has to be followed and is the law of the land. If you try to criticize them or even slightly suggest something, you will be put to execution via guillotine. So this was a very bad product which came out of National Assembly. Now Jacobins, they came to power. Why did they come to power? Because the working class, the laborer class, were not satisfied with the National Assembly, the moderate people. Hence, eventually by voting process or by influence, the Jacobins now formed the majority of National Assembly. One good thing they did was they gave adult suffrage, that is universal adult franchise. Every adult has the right to vote without any income condition. So this was one good thing they did. Their leader was this guy called Robespierre, and he started this reign of terror. Why is it called reign of terror? Because there was all the freedoms were crushed. If you criticize their government, they'll put you under a guillotine. If you write something on press, you are a newspaper editor, and you write something against them in your newspaper, you will be put to guillotine. Okay, no jail or anything. Straight away they'll hack off your head. So this Robespierre, for the time France was under Robespierre, that time was called reign of terror. Okay, Robespierre got the king executed in 1793. The king and the queen both executed in 1793, and after that the reign of terror takes a huge monstrous form, and everybody, even Robespierre, got his advisors killed via guillotine if they dared to suggest something. And eventually people were so much frustrated, the National Assembly people were so much frustrated, that Robespierre himself was put to execution via guillotine. Once Robespierre was executed, the reign of terror ended and the era of Jacobin government ended, and a new form of government started, which again was controlled by the bourgeois. This government was called the directorate government. So first there was pure National Assembly, moderate people were there, right and left all were there. Then came the Jacobins, reign of terror, Robespierre and all his terrible acts, and then came the directorate government. Now in 1793 the king and queen were executed. Just after 2 years Robespierre was also executed, hence the Jacobian period ended by 1795. In 1795, Directorate government came into power, and Directorate government in 1795 itself, they started to write a new constitution for France, but it only lasted for 4 years. In 1799, Napoleon did a military coup on the Directorate government and became the military dictator, and eventually becoming the king of France. He brought back monarchy into France, which was heading towards becoming a modern nation state. He brought back monarchy. So this was all about Directorate. Now, till now, whatever we have studied was the internal affair of France, was happening internally within France. The civil war, the reign of terror, everything, the new constitution, new parliament, it was happening within the boundaries of France. Now, simultaneously, France was also involved in some external wars, and these wars were conducted not by the king, but by the newly formed government, the National Assembly. The National Assembly was created in 1789. Just 3 years from its creation, 1792, they started waging war outside. Now, why did they wage war? They had two agendas. First, they thought that the surrounding countries in Europe, which are monarchy, might attack France to reinstate monarchy in France and remove their government. So that was a kind of offensive defense. In order to prevent attack, they'll attack first. So the neighboring countries were attacked by the National Assembly government, and these French Revolutionary Wars continued for 10 years, 1792 to 1802. So the first aim of the French Revolutionary War is to promote the ideals of French Revolution. The ideas have to be promoted to the people living in the neighboring countries, so that they might also revolt against their king, and entire Europe will become modern nation state. Okay, they will have modern values of democracy, equality, fraternity, liberty, constitutionalism, popular sovereignty, parliament. Okay, these values they wanted to promote all over Europe. All other surrounding countries, the people living there should adopt these values and wage war against their governments, against their kings. So this was the agenda, the first agenda. So initially they waged war against three countries: Austria, Germany and Italy. These were the three countries. Italy also had many other satellite colonies around France in different other French countries. So they waged newly formed French government waged war against these three countries. Eventually other countries also joined in and waged war against France. Britain, Spain, Holland, Hungary, these other empires waged war against the French, and the French were losing the war kind of, but in the right moment came the right person, and that was Napoleon. He emerged as a war hero. He repulsed all that attack where every other general was failing. Napoleon won and actually went on and advanced the war and went on to the enemy's territory, and he was treated as a big war hero that time. And therefore in 1799 he was able to overthrow the weak Directorate government and took on the power and became a military dictator and eventually a monarch, a king. So 10 years it continued as French Revolutionary Wars, where they were spreading the revolutionary ideas. But after Napoleon came in, when he was properly a king, in 1803 whatever wars were waged were kind of personal agenda of Napoleon and personal decisions of Napoleon. Therefore these wars are known as Napoleonic Wars. It continued for 12 years from 1803 to 1815. Napoleon, apart from being a military dictator, apart from starting the monarchy again, he also created something which is called as Napoleonic Code. It was a kind of a rule book, a set of rules known as Napoleonic Code. It had many good things which France still uses, like efficient administration or merit-based selections. Now you cannot select somebody because he's related to somebody. After Napoleon, selections became merit-based. Okay, so Napoleonic Code consisted of efficient administration and merit-based selection. These codes, these few codes are still used in modern France. But eventually Napoleon went on mindless wars, and was seen as a conqueror rather than a liberator. He went on to different parts of Europe waging wars, trying to spread the revolutionary ideas, but nobody looked at him as a liberator. He was looked upon as a conqueror. One thing he did for Europe is create a wave of nationalism all across Europe, because Napoleon was a French guy. So if Germans were attacked by Napoleon, they didn't see as a liberator coming. They saw that the French are attacking them. In return, what happened? The Germans united, and Germany united, Italy united, and every other European countries started having their own nationalistic zeal. Everybody started feeling a belonging to their own country. So different countries, different nations emerged, they became stronger and they became united because Napoleon was attacking them. So in order to face the French attack, they united among themselves. Indirectly, what Napoleon did, Napoleon united the countries, especially Germany and Italy, and created a wave of nationalism across Europe. Finally, Napoleon was defeated in a place called Waterloo, which is in Belgium today. He got defeated in 1815, and after that the external powers, the neighboring powers, reinstated the older monarchy in France in 1815. But this was a very, very weak government. They could not hold their grounds, and ultimately in 1871 France became the Republic of France, the modern France which we look at today. So the things started in 1789 and eventually it ended in 1871. Okay. Now there were already few ideas which were going around which started the French Revolution. Of course, the third estate people were treated badly by the French state, but still there were certain ideas which was making rounds in those days Europe. So those ideas also promoted the French Revolution. These ideas are rationalism. Earlier there was a notion by the church that man has to suffer in earth and later on he'll go to heaven and there he'll have a happier life, something of that sort. But the rationalists like John Locke, they argued that no, the purpose of life on earth is to be happy, not suffer, unlike the church. This idea was gaining currency, and hence the influence of church and the clergy was reducing day by day because they were causing lot of problems and pains to the common people. So rationalism gained currency. This was one of the idea. Then secularism. We discussed this earlier. Secularism in France means completely ignoring God out of the government business. God has got no business in government. So this was secularism. Doctrine of nature. There are natural laws of nature. There are natural laws made for human beings, that every human being is created equal and every human being is free to do whatever he wants. The ideas of equality and liberty are natural laws. These were given by John Locke. This idea argued that the laws for men are written by nature and the laws written by the churches will no longer be applicable. Atheism. Atheism means not believing in God. In atheism, these people believe that a destiny of man is in his own hands. Okay, it's not like pre-written or written by God or written by some religious textbook. Every man can build his or her own fate. The next idea is Adam Smith's laissez-faire, free hand. Government has no business in doing business. The business and the economy should be free of government interference. And the last influence was the American Revolution. As I told you in the beginning, that American Revolution ended in 1783 and just 6 years later the French Revolution started. So American Revolution, the ideas of American Revolution also impacted in starting the French Revolution big time, and therefore American Revolution plays a very big role in starting the French Revolution. Now, what were the ideas that came out of the French Revolution? We discussed those ideas before, but here we'll see it in a proper arrangement. Now in the starting you have seen this list, that is the output ideas of French Revolution. 7 ideas. First is liberty. French society that time was facing lot of restrictions by the government. There was restriction on people, restriction on press, on speech, on religion, every kind of restrictions were there. So the French Revolution broke out of all those restrictions and created this idea, and hence the idea of liberty was born. Then we see the idea of equality. So in this concept, everybody was treated equally in a political sense. Now everybody has right to vote, everybody has equal political rights, everybody has equal eligibility and chance of getting into a government position. Everybody will be treated equally as far as taxation is concerned, which was earlier very much unequal. Then fraternity. French Revolution was all about brotherhood. The third estate formed a brotherhood and created the modern nation state of France. Therefore fraternity is important part of nationalism, nation building, and very much soul of the French Revolution. So this idea also came out of French Revolution. In Indian Constitution, if you see that liberty, entire Article 15 is based on liberty. It provides, the entire Article 15 of Indian Constitution gives liberty to the citizens and to the people. Then equality, Article 14 to Article 18 is completely dedicated to equality. Fraternity, brotherhood, it's an important part in Indian preamble, Constitution's preamble. So we have taken these three concepts from French Constitution directly, and which is a product of the French Revolution. Then comes popular sovereignty. Now because people are the source of power, so people will decide who is going to sit in the parliament and make laws for them. Okay, king is not the choice of the people, his source of power is God. But in the present modern state, the parliamentarians sit in the parliament because they are voted by the people. So it's popular sovereignty, popular will of the people. So this idea also came out of the French Revolution. Then constitutionalism, from the very beginning of the French Revolution, the National Assembly 1789, they had this feeling that they need a written constitution, and vague and absurd and laws made out of thin air by the king won't work anymore. So they need proper well-written laws, and from there came the idea of constitutionalism. And after American and French Revolution, every country started writing their constitution. Then natural rights. Earlier rights were the laws for man was written by the churches, by a divine origin, they used to say. But after John Locke's doctrine of natural laws, natural rights were created, that every man has got natural rights, and eventually these natural rights took the form of fundamental rights. Okay, the fundamental rights given in all the constitution to its citizens and even to the other people comes from the concept of natural rights, which came in the French Revolution. Then secularism, throwing out of religion and interference of religion and God and religious people in governing a country. Okay, so removal of religion from governance is the French concept of secularism. We also have secularism, but our idea of secularism is different from French ideas. So these were the 7 output ideas of French Revolution which has impacted the modern world. So UPSC's answer, whenever you will write that 250 word answer, should revolve around these 7 ideas. You have to explain these 7 ideas and connect it with the events that happened in the French Revolution. What exactly happened and how these ideas came out of French Revolution. What was the condition? So in order to explain, in order to write the answer on French Revolution, you should know these 7 ideas and the circumstances which created them. Okay, but the entire French Revolution has got some pros and cons. Let's look at them, then we'll wrap it up. Now, because of the French Revolution, the various colonies, there was a wave of anti-colonialism as well, not only anti-monarchy but anti-colonialism as well. Now, Spanish and Portuguese empires also had many colonies in Central and South America. Like Brazil was a colony of the Portuguese Empire, whereas the other Argentina, Bolivia, Venezuela, Mexico, they were all part of the Spanish Empire. These colonies started getting weaker. The grip of Spain and Portugal on these colonies started getting weaker, and hence there was independence movement in South America, Central America, and they eventually get their independence. A character emerged in South America known as Simon Bolivar. He was like the George Washington of North America, of USA. He went on fighting against Spain and Portugal in these colonies and got many countries freed. Countries like Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia. He got freed all these countries, especially from Spain, and he wanted to create a federation like USA, like United States of America. He wanted to create a federation of these independent states, calling it Gran Colombia. Okay, but he didn't succeed in creating that federation, but he succeeded in getting all these colonies freedom from Spanish rule. And other Portuguese colonies also started revolting against their master state, their master countries. So this was a good impact of French Revolution. French Revolution also removed slavery. Britain abolished slavery in 1833. Then America, USA abolished it in 1865. So abolition of slavery was also started with French Revolution, and it helped in removing this big evil. Now, another good impact of French Revolution is removal of feudalism. Feudalism was an older economic model according to which countries used to run. French Revolution removed feudalism from Europe and ushered Europe in a new economic model of capitalism. They acquired land from the aristocrats, the nobles and the clergies, and distributed among the landless laborers, the peasants, the farmers. So this was again a good impact of the French Revolution. The next good thing was Jacobian Constitution. Though Jacobians were not good people, they were not a good political entity, but the constitution they created gave universal adult suffrage. For the first time the world saw universal adult franchise, that everybody, poor, rich, middle class, male, female, whatever race, whatever religion, you will have the right to vote. So this was started in the Jacobian Constitution, and it was followed since then by many other countries. The Jacobians also gave people the right to insurrection. That means the right to revolt. If you're not satisfied with the government, you have the right to overthrow it. You can revolt and overthrow it. So this was a very big power the Jacobians gave to the people. The Jacobians also decided the state policy. The state will have a policy in which the country will aim to give happiness to all its citizens and provide work for all its citizens. So this was also the creation of a welfare state. Today, most of the nation states are welfare states. India is a welfare state. The directive principles of state policies in India, the state aims to provide happiness to the people, work for people, justice for people. These are all state policies. So first time Jacobians created the concept of state policy, that the state will aim to provide happiness and work and well-being, overall well-being for its citizens. This was again a new idea and a new trend, a new impact started by the French Revolution. Then in the French Revolution, initially the workers were not taken care of much. Okay, the farmers were taken care of, the bourgeois was taken care of, but the working class, the laborers, they were not taken care of. Therefore, there was a solidarity for the workers. The lawmakers had a soft corner for the laborers. They started thinking about the welfare of the laborers. They started giving more powers to the laborers, that laborers will have a say in the companies, the industries decisions. Okay, few people, only the owners, the capitalist will not decide the future of any company or the mode of work for any company. The laborers will also have a say. So this power was also given. The laborers became a priority in the revolution. So the start of socialism, the solidarity for laborers, the start of socialism also was seen in French Revolution. Later on it became proper socialism and communism. Now if you look some of the bad impacts of French Revolution, first is that in the initial phases of French Revolution we saw that laborers suffered a lot. Now because laborers suffered, there came a pro-labor government. The Jacobians were pro-labor, and from here the constant tussle between the bourgeois and the labor started. Today also in many communist inclined politics, there will always be a laborer versus bourgeois conversation. Okay, so this suffering of laborers initially in the French Revolution led to a new kind of politics, the communist politics, the labor versus bourgeois politics. Then we see a feature called Mobocracy, where people who have certain grievances, they come together and they take laws in their own hand. Now, for example, even in India, you see people get together and lynch a particular person who might have created a crime, might not have created a crime, but people get together and take law in their own hands. Same kind of thing happened in France during the Jacobian era. Even in the National Assembly era, there was no law and order, and there was complete chaos in reign of terror. So it's not democracy, it's pseudo democracy. It is called Mobocracy. Now, French Revolution had lot of Mobocracy. Then French Revolution gave rise to dictatorship. Napoleon, because Napoleon was a popular military leader, he became a dictator. He did a military coup. He conducted a military coup and he became a military dictator, and then he became the king of France. So French Revolution led to dictatorship. Finally, because of Napoleon's war all over Europe, there was an aggressive, a militant nationalism all over Europe. Now the Germans were more Germans and ready to defend themselves from the French. The Italians were more Italians. Okay, now because of Napoleon's war against different countries, they got this militant form of nationalism, radical nationalism, and hence the seeds for World War was sown in the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleonic Wars led to nationalism, radical nationalism, militant nationalism, that led to aggressive competition and rivalry among European nations, which ultimately leads to World War I, which leads to World War II. So these are the few bad impacts of French Revolution. Hope you understood the French Revolution, the ideas, the events, everything I have discussed. I don't think many of you will make to this part of the video, the end part, but still those who have made it this far, kudos to you, congratulations to you. You are very persistent, hardworking, and you have patience, and most probably you will achieve success in this journey of clearing UPSC. So congratulations to those people who made it this far, and please consider subscribing the channel if you find value. And that's it in this video.